So today I am going to be going through how I retouch images in Photoshop. This was requested in my last video and I see a lot of people online going really over the top with retouching. So I'm going to go through how I do it and hopefully it'll help you out. If you want to see any other tutorials, then let me know in the comments and I can do that for next week. So this retouching method is probably a lot softer than a lot of people normally do, but it does make the images look a lot nicer for designs, which helps, and it's mainly using curves and selective color. So to begin with, I've just masked out this image, but I'm going to leave the background on because why not? First, I normally start with some neural filters, which are here. I don't know if they're on all versions of Photoshop. I think I'm on the latest version that's not the beta, and they're on there, but this isn't a necessity. I usually just do this JPEG artifact removal. It won't really do much for this image because it's a lot higher quality, but for general images that you use it's really helpful just because it removes all the artifacts on the image. So that's almost done. It usually takes a couple minutes depending on the image, but it's usually worth it. I usually put the strength on high. You can put it on low or medium, but it doesn't really make much of a difference depending on which one you put it. So yeah, I just put it on high and it works quite well. I'll show you the difference now. So that's before and then that's after. So it just does remove all the artifacts and yeah, makes the image slightly better quality, which is good. I usually convert the image to a smart object after that because when you move the image it has to reapply the neural filters, I think. So that can take like 2 minutes to move the image. So if you convert it to a smart object, that will stop that. So now it's converted to a smart object, the first thing that I always do is I apply a camera raw filter, which is here. This is sort of to remove the contrast. I don't literally remove the contrast, but that's the aim of the camera raw filter, just to prepare for what we're going to do in a minute. So I'll usually decrease the highlights because we're going to add highlights manually later. Depending on the image, I will bump up the shadows. We probably need to here because there's quite harsh shadows here and here. And then I'll boost the whites slightly, and then the blacks again. And then I'll just add a tiny bit of texture and some clarity depending on the image. That looks alright like that. And then I'll usually bring the vibrance down by 5 because we can always change the skin tones later. I usually add some lights and some darks again, and then here I'll always put 100% color noise reduction just to remove all that, and then I'll sharpen it slightly. We can always sharpen it later. And then sometimes I'll change the luminance, probably will on this one, and sometimes I'll make his skin tone slightly more red. And yeah, that looks good. So then I will usually desaturate the eyes. Sometimes when you put color noise reduction on, it will make his eyes go slightly pink. This one it hasn't because it's a bit of a higher quality image. I'm still going to do it anyway, which is just, yeah, painting in the whites of his eyes all the way around. And then the other one, which is here, like this. And then once that's done, I'll add curves. The clipping mask gets the layer again, then hold Alt and drag the layer mask onto the curves so the layer mask is duplicated, and now you can sort of brighten up the eyes, which I'll do softly, and then I'll just go into the corners and just reduce the brightness there so it sort of doesn't make his eyes look so flat. And then I'll probably bring down the saturation slightly just to bring back some of the colour so it doesn't look so unnatural. There you go. And then after that I will add curves for the shadows. So same again, curves, mask it to the layer, and then I'll put the blend mode on multiply, and then invert the mask with Control I, and then zoom in with a soft brush and then you sort of exaggerate all of the shadows on his face like this. Oh yeah, put it on 50%, and then you can always adjust it after. Yeah, exaggerate all the shadows on his face like this. I don't usually do his eyes because it makes it look like he's got like a black eye or something if you put it under his eye. But yeah, everywhere else like this. And then once you've done that, I will do a second layer of curves for the highlights now, which the blend mode is screen, and then put that onto 50%. You can always change it afterwards, and then invert the mask again with Control I. And then it's the same again, just for the highlights. And then you can always play around with the flow, just to be a bit softer with the brush for the shirt, because it does look a bit harsh when you put it on 100%. And then finally, which is probably the most important part, will always be selective color. Now this is just to manipulate the colors to bring out the ones you want. Usually I always do this to match the colors of renders, so if you have more than one render in your design, you can use it to match the colors of shirts and skin tones. So for example, we've got this shirt, we can change the colors here of his, I don't know, it's a training top, whatever. Change the colors there to match whatever you want. So normally for this I would go on the yellows and just, yeah, play around with that until you get the skin tone that you like. You can sort of make it look a lot less harsh with the blacks, etc. And yeah, just put whatever you want. Something like this looks good for this one. And then once you've done that, you can sort of play around with the opacity of the highlights and shadows. You can go back into the mask if you want. I'll do something like that, that looks good. Maybe just play around with that like this, see what it's looking like, and that's looking good, yeah. And then one final thing, depending on the image, I will just sharpen it up slightly, which is in sharpen and then sharpen more, just to, yeah, make it look a bit better. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So if you guys found this helpful, just leave a like, subscribe, and let me know what you'd like to see next.